Elite are born different. Smarter minds, better opportunities, some hidden advantage the rest of us never received. I believed that too, for a long time. I used to look at calm, decisive people and assume they had something I didn't. But after years of watching closely, reading deeply, and learning the hard way, I discovered a quieter truth. The elite do not think faster, they think clearer, and clarity changes everything. I've seen this difference up close. A colleague once faced a situation that would have shaken most people. Pressure was high, opinions were loud, emotions were everywhere. While others reacted instantly, defending themselves or explaining too much, he stayed still. He listened, he waited, then he spoke once, calmly, choosing his words with precision. That single moment shifted the entire room. And nothing about him was flashy, but his mind was steady. That steadiness was power. This is what most people misunderstand. Elite thinking has very little to do with intelligence. It has everything to do with control. Control over emotions, control over attention, control over decisions, the ability to pause when others panic, to see clearly when others feel overwhelmed, to act deliberately instead of reacting automatically. Books played a critical role in rewiring how I understood this. Not books meant to impress, not books filled with complicated theories, but books that quietly train your mind to operate under pressure. Books that teach you how to observe your thoughts instead of obeying them, how to slow down your reactions, how to make decisions without emotional noise. These books don't give you motivation, they give you structure, and structure creates freedom. I've watched friends apply these ideas with remarkable results. One stopped overthinking every decision and began moving forward with confidence. Another learned to detach from constant validation and suddenly found peace. A family member replaced motivation with discipline and changed their entire daily rhythm. None of them became elite overnight, but all of them became calmer, clearer, and more powerful over time. Elite thinking is not loud or aggressive. It is quiet, grounded, and intentional. It grows through repetition, not inspiration. When practiced daily, it reshapes how you see problems, people, pressure, and yourself over time without chasing external approval. This audiobook is not about becoming better than others. It's about becoming stronger than your old patterns. Over the next 8 chapters, you'll be introduced to the core mental frameworks found in books that rewire your mind for power and clarity. Each chapter focuses on a specific way elite thinkers see the world differently. Not in theory, but in practice. These are ideas you can apply immediately, no matter where you are in life. If you've ever felt trapped in your own thoughts, emotionally reactive or mentally exhausted, this is for you. You don't need more information, you need better thinking habits. You need clarity, and clarity is something you can train. As you listen, don't rush. Let the ideas settle. Choose one insight at a time and apply it to your life. Real change doesn't come from knowing everything. It comes from practicing a few things consistently. And if this message resonates with you, share this video with a friend you know who needs it right now to improve their life. Together, let's build calmer minds, clearer thinking, and a stronger way of living. Chapter 1. Elite thinking starts with emotional control. Most people believe power comes from intelligence, confidence, or dominance. In reality, power begins much earlier, in a quieter place. It begins with emotional control. Before elite thinkers master strategy, discipline, or focus, they master their reactions. This is the foundation everything else rests on. Without emotional control, intelligence becomes chaos. Talent turns inconsistent. Effort leaks through impulsive decisions. I learned this lesson not from a book at first, but by watching someone I worked with. He wasn't the loudest in the room. He didn't interrupt, over-explain, or fight for attention. In meetings where tension ran high, he stayed calm. When criticized, He didn't defend himself immediately. When challenged, he didn't raise his voice. Instead, he paused, and he listened fully. Then, when he spoke, his words carried weight. People leaned in, decisions followed. Respect appeared naturally, without force. At the time, I thought he was simply confident. Later, I realized confidence was the result, not the cause. The cause was control. He had trained himself not to obey every emotion the moment it appeared, while others reacted automatically. He chose deliberately. Most people live at the mercy of their emotions. A comment ruins their mood. A message triggers anxiety. A small setback turns into a bad day. They don't decide how they feel. They experience it and act on it instantly. This is not weakness. It's conditioning. We are rarely taught how to sit with emotions without letting them dictate behavior. Elite thinkers understand something critical. Emotions are signals, not commands. Feeling anger doesn't mean you must speak. Feeling fear doesn't mean you must retreat. Feeling excitement doesn't mean you must rush. The elite don't suppress emotions, but they also don't surrender to them. They observe first, they decide second. Many of the books that rewire the mind for power and clarity return to this same principle in different forms. Stoic philosophy, modern psychology, and leadership frameworks all point toward the same truth. Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space lives freedom. The ability to choose your response is the first real form of power. I struggled with this for years. I used to react quickly, thinking speed was strength. If something bothered me, I responded immediately. If I felt misunderstood, I explained myself endlessly. If I felt pressure, and I rushed decisions just to escape discomfort. The result was exhaustion. I was always busy, but rarely clear. Always responding, but rarely leading. Everything began to change when I encountered the idea that calm is not passive. Calm is controlled energy. Calm is readiness. Calm allows you to see more than one move ahead. When emotions take over, vision narrows. When you slow down, vision widens. A close friend applied this lesson during a difficult period at work. He was overlooked for a promotion he believed he deserved. Instead of reacting with bitterness or confrontation, he stepped back. He examined his performance honestly. He adjusted how he communicated. He stopped seeking validation and focused on consistency. Months later, he was offered a role with greater responsibility than the one he originally wanted. So he told me the hardest part wasn't the work. It was resisting the urge to react emotionally when things felt unfair. This is how elite thinking separates itself from average thinking. The average mind asks, "How do I feel right now?" The elite mind asks, "What response serves me long term?" That shift alone rewires how you move through life. Emotional control doesn't mean becoming cold or detached. It means creating space. Space between feeling and action. Space between thought and decision. Space where clarity can enter. When you create that space, you stop making choices you later regret. Practical emotional control begins with small habits. Pausing before responding to messages. Taking one breath before speaking when triggered. Naming the emotion silently instead of acting on it. These actions seem simple, but they are uncomfortable. That discomfort is the training ground. Elite thinkers are willing to be uncomfortable for a moment to avoid long-term damage. One exercise I adopted from these books was delaying response. If something provoked me, I gave myself time. Sometimes minutes, sometimes hours. That delay alone changed the quality of my decisions. What once felt urgent often became irrelevant. What felt personal often revealed itself as noise. Another key lesson is this. You don't owe everyone a reaction. Silence is not weakness. Silence is strategy. When you don't react immediately, you gather information. You protect your energy. You maintain control of the situation instead of handing it away. Elite thinkers are not immune to emotion. They feel deeply, but they do not broadcast every feeling or let it drive behavior. They choose when to speak, when to act, and when to remain still. This is why they often appear calm under pressure. Calm is not the absence of emotion, it is mastery over it. As you apply this, expect resistance. Your mind is used to reacting. It will urge you to respond quickly, defend yourself, explain or escape discomfort. This urge is not intuition. It is habit, and habits can be retrained. Start with awareness. Notice when emotions rise. Notice the impulse to act immediately. Then pause. Ask yourself one question. What response aligns with the person I want to become? That question alone introduces clarity. Emotional control is the gateway skill. Without it, discipline collapses. Focus fractures. Decisions blur. With it, everything strengthens. This is why elite thinking always begins here. Control your reactions, and you begin to control your life. Chapter 2. Clarity is a weapon the elite protect. If emotional control is the foundation of elite thinking, clarity is the weapon built on top of it. Clarity determines what you see, what you ignore, and what you act on. Without clarity, effort is scattered. Energy leaks. Decisions feel heavy. With clarity, even difficult paths feel lighter, because you know exactly why you are walking them. Most people believe clarity comes from having more information, more opinions, more options, more advice. In reality, the opposite is true. The elite do not drown themselves in input. They reduce it. They filter aggressively. They protect their mental space the same way others protect their money or time. I learned this lesson the hard way. There was a period in my life when I consumed everything. Books, podcasts, videos, articles. I told myself I was learning. In truth, I was avoiding commitment. My mind was full, but unfocused. I knew a little about many things, but I wasn't building anything meaningful. Every idea felt interesting, every direction felt possible, and because of that, nothing moved forward. Clarity didn't arrive when I learned more. It arrived when I started cutting things out. I noticed this pattern again in someone I deeply respect. A former manager of mine had an unusual habit. He never seemed rushed, even though his responsibilities were heavy. His calendar was full, yet his mind felt calm. One day, I asked him how he managed so much without burning out. His answer was simple. I decide what matters before the noise shows up. That sentence stayed with me. Elite thinkers don't wake up reacting. They wake up oriented. They know their priorities before the world starts demanding attention. When clarity is established early, distractions lose their power. When it isn't, everything feels urgent. Most people live in reaction mode. Notifications decide their focus. Other people's expectations decide their schedule. Emotions decide their energy. By the end of the day, they feel exhausted. Not because they did too much, but because they decided too little. Clarity is about deciding in advance. It is the ability to say, this matters, that does not. And to repeat that decision daily without guilt. Many of the books that rewire your mind for power and clarity emphasize this principle. Whether they talk about deep work, essentialism, or focus, the message is consistent. If you don't choose what deserves your attention, everything will take it. And a close friend applied this lesson during a chaotic phase of his career. He was talented, ambitious, and overwhelmed. Every opportunity sounded good. Every request felt important. He was constantly busy, yet frustrated by slow progress. After reading about focus and essential priorities, he made one uncomfortable decision. He chose one main objective for the next 6 months and said no to everything that didn't support it. The first few weeks were painful. He felt guilty. He worried about missing out. He questioned whether he was making a mistake. But over time, something changed. His thinking became sharper, his work improved, his confidence grew. Clarity gave him momentum, and momentum created results. This is what elite thinkers understand. Clarity is not passive, it is aggressive simplicity. So it requires courage to let go of good options to protect the right one. Another misconception is that clarity means certainty. It doesn't. Clarity means direction, not guarantees. Elite thinkers don't wait until everything is perfectly clear. They choose a direction based on values, long-term goals, and available information, then adjust as they go. What they avoid is drifting. Mental clutter is one of the greatest enemies of power. When your mind is crowded, you become reactive. You overthink small decisions. You hesitate on important ones. You feel mentally tired even when doing little. Clarity clears that clutter. It reduces friction. One practical habit that transformed my thinking was limiting daily decisions. Instead of constantly asking, "What should I do next?" I decided in advance, and I planned the day around one or two meaningful tasks. Everything else became secondary. This reduced anxiety dramatically. When you know what matters today, you stop negotiating with yourself all day long. Elite thinkers also protect clarity by managing their inputs. They don't consume information randomly. They choose when to read, when to listen, and when to disconnect. Silence becomes a tool. Not every moment needs stimulation. Stillness sharpens perception. There is a subtle but powerful shift that happens when clarity becomes your priority. You stop explaining yourself as much. You stop chasing approval. You move with quiet confidence because your actions are aligned with your direction. Clarity also changes how you experience pressure. When you know why you're doing something, stress becomes manageable. When you don't, even small obstacles feel overwhelming. Purpose reduces emotional noise. This doesn't mean elite thinkers live rigid lives. It means they are intentional. They leave room for rest, creativity, and relationships, but those things are chosen, not accidental. If you want to apply this chapter, start with subtraction. Ask yourself, what is stealing my attention without giving real value back? What commitments drain me without moving me closer to who I want to become? What inputs create noise instead of insight? Then choose one priority, not 10. 1. Protect it daily. Build your schedule, energy, and focus around it. Expect discomfort at first. That discomfort is clarity replacing chaos. Clarity is not a luxury. It is a discipline, and for elite thinkers, it is non-negotiable. When you protect clarity, you protect your future self. Chapter 3. Elite. Think in the long term, not the mood of the moment. One of the sharpest dividing lines between average thinking and elite thinking is time perspective. Most people live inside the mood of the moment. Elite thinkers live inside the logic of the long term. This single difference explains why some people make steady progress while others stay trapped in cycles of motivation, burnout, and regret. The average mind asks a simple question before acting. How do I feel right now? The elite mind asks a harder one. What does my future self need me to do? This is not because elite thinkers lack emotion. They feel doubt, boredom, frustration, and fear just like everyone else. The difference is that they do not let temporary feelings dictate permanent direction. They understand that emotions are short-term signals, while outcomes are long-term consequences. I learned this lesson through watching a close friend struggle with discipline. He was intelligent, driven, and full of ideas. On days when motivation was high, he worked intensely. On days when motivation dropped, everything stopped. His life moved in bursts, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Over time, the inconsistency wore him down more than the work itself. Eventually, he encountered a simple idea repeated across many books on discipline and mental strength. Motivation is unreliable. but structure is not. That idea challenged everything he believed. He had been waiting to feel ready. Elite thinkers act ready before they feel it. He began changing one thing. He committed to showing up every day, regardless of mood. Not at maximum effort, just consistently. Some days were strong, others were weak, but the action continued. Months later, the results spoke for themselves. What changed his life was not intensity, it was continuity. Elite thinkers understand something most people resist. Feelings are weather, not direction. You don't cancel a journey because it rains. You adjust, but you keep moving. Many books that rewire the mind emphasize this truth in different language. They talk about discipline, systems, habits, and delayed gratification. But beneath the surface, they are all teaching the same lesson. Long-term thinking requires emotional maturity. It requires accepting discomfort today to protect clarity tomorrow. Most people underestimate how often their decisions are driven by mood. When they feel tired, they skip what matters. When they feel inspired, they overcommit. When they feel uncertain, they delay. And these choices feel harmless in the moment, but they compound quietly over time. Elite thinkers zoom out. They see their life as a long arc, not a series of isolated days. This perspective changes behavior. Skipping one workout becomes less about energy and more about identity. Avoiding one hard conversation becomes less about comfort and more about consequences. I had to confront this in my own life when I realized how often I negotiated with myself. If I didn't feel focused, I postponed work. If I didn't feel confident, I avoided decisions. If I didn't feel motivated, I waited. The result was stagnation disguised as preparation. What changed everything was replacing mood-based decisions with principle-based decisions. Instead of asking how I felt, I asked what the situation required. That shift was uncomfortable at first. Acting without emotional alignment felt unnatural. But over time, something surprising happened. The emotions followed the action. Confidence grew from consistency. Motivation became a byproduct, not a prerequisite. Elite thinkers trust process over feeling. They understand that feelings fluctuate, but systems endure. When you build a system that carries you forward regardless of mood, progress becomes inevitable. This does not mean pushing yourself relentlessly. Long-term thinking includes rest, recovery, and balance, but those too are intentional. Elite thinkers rest on purpose. They don't quit impulsively. They recharge strategically so they can continue. A family member of mine embodied this perfectly. He worked a demanding job for years without dramatic breakthroughs. No sudden success, no viral moments, just steady effort. And while others chased shortcuts, he refined routines. While others complained about lack of motivation, he relied on schedules. A decade later, his life looked radically different. The transformation was invisible while it was happening, but it was undeniable in hindsight. This is how long-term thinking works. It feels boring while it's building. It feels slow while it's compounding. And then one day, it looks like talent. Elite thinkers are patient with results, but strict with behavior. They forgive slow progress, but they do not tolerate inconsistency. They know that success is not created by heroic effort once in a while, but by ordinary effort repeated relentlessly. One of the most powerful practices you can adopt from this chapter is separating action from emotion. Decide in advance what your non-negotiables are, the actions you take regardless of how you feel. These become anchors. When emotions fluctuate, the anchors hold. Another key practice is zooming out regularly. When a task feels heavy, ask yourself how it fits into the larger picture. When discomfort arises, ask what it's training you for. This reframing turns resistance into meaning. Elite thinkers also limit emotional decision-making during vulnerable states. They don't make major choices when exhausted, angry, or euphoric. They recognize that clarity has a rhythm. Timing matters. Long-term thinking is not about suppressing emotion. It is about respecting consequence. It is about understanding that the life you want is built through decisions you repeat when no one is watching and nothing feels dramatic. If you want to think like the elite, stop asking whether you feel like doing what matters. Ask whether the future you respect would thank you for doing it anyway. That question rewires behavior, and behavior, repeated over time, rewires identity. Elite thinking is not emotional. It is intentional, and intention, sustained over time, is what separates those who drift from those who ride. Chapter 4. Elite. Don't overthink, they decide. One of the most common traps that keeps capable people stuck is overthinking. It feels intelligent, it feels responsible, it feels like preparation. But in reality, overthinking is often disguised fear. Fear of making the wrong choice. Fear of being judged. Fear of taking responsibility for an outcome that cannot be fully controlled. Elite thinkers understand something simple and uncomfortable. Progress requires decisions, not certainty. While most people wait to feel confident before deciding, elite thinkers decide in order to become confident. Overthinking does not come from lack of intelligence. It comes from too many options and too little clarity about values. When you don't know what matters most, every choice feels heavy. When you do, decisions become lighter, even when they are difficult. I learned this lesson after missing several opportunities in my own life. There were moments when the path forward was visible, but uncomfortable. Instead of deciding, I analyzed. I weighed pros and cons endlessly. I asked for opinions. I waited for a sign that never came. By the time I felt ready, the moment had passed. The cost wasn't just the lost opportunity, it was the quiet erosion of self-trust. Elite thinkers protect self-trust fiercely. They know that every time you avoid a decision, you send yourself a message, I don't trust myself. Over time, that message becomes identity. I once worked with someone who embodied decisive thinking in a powerful way. He didn't rush. He didn't pretend to know everything, but when it was time to choose, he chose, even under uncertainty. Especially under uncertainty. His decisions weren't always perfect, but they were timely. And that timeliness created momentum. Most people confuse decisiveness with recklessness. They believe deciding quickly means ignoring information. Elite thinkers know the difference. They gather enough information, then they stop. They recognize the point of diminishing returns. Beyond that point, more thinking doesn't improve the decision. It only delays action. Books that focus on elite thinking often return to this principle through mental models and decision frameworks. The goal is not to eliminate risk, but to manage it. Not to guarantee success, but to avoid paralysis. Overthinking thrives in environments with too many options and no deadlines. Elite thinkers impose constraints. They limit choices. They create timelines. Onto constraints force clarity. When the window closes, the mind stops spinning and starts choosing. A close friend of mine struggled with this intensely. He was bright, capable, and ambitious, but constantly stuck. Every decision became a mental battlefield. Career moves, relationships, even small daily choices drained him. Eventually, he adopted a rule. Small decisions get made fast. Big decisions get made deliberately, but once. No revisiting unless new information appears. This rule changed his life. Mental energy returned. Anxiety dropped. Progress increased. He realized that most decisions were reversible, and treating them as permanent was unnecessary pressure. Elite thinkers categorize decisions. Some are one-way doors, others are two-way doors. If a decision can be reversed, they act quickly. If it cannot, they slow down, but still commit. What they do not do is hesitate indefinitely. Another reason overthinking is so common is emotional attachment to outcomes. When your identity is tied to being right, every decision feels dangerous. Elite thinkers detach identity from outcome. A bad result is feedback, not a verdict on worth. This detachment creates freedom. When you stop needing every decision to validate you, you start deciding more cleanly. You learn faster. You adapt quicker. One powerful shift you can make is changing the question you ask yourself. Instead of asking, "What is the perfect choice?" ask, "What is the next reasonable step?" Progress rarely requires perfection. It requires movement. Elite thinkers also understand the cost of indecision. While a wrong decision has consequences, indecision has invisible ones. Lost time, missed learning, so eroded confidence. Over time, indecision becomes a habit just as powerful as action. Another personal turning point came when I realized that clarity often follows action, not the other way around. I had been waiting to feel clear before moving, but clarity arrived only after I acted. Movement created information. Information created adjustment. Adjustment created confidence. Elite thinkers trust this process. They don't expect to see the entire path. They commit to the next step and correct course along the way. This mindset keeps them agile instead of frozen. To apply this chapter, start by noticing where you overthink most. Is it career decisions? Conversations? Creative work? Then apply structure. Set a decision deadline. Limit inputs. Define what good enough looks like. Decide. Practice deciding faster on low-stakes choices. What to wear, what to eat, when to start. These small acts train decisiveness. Over time, the skill transfers to larger areas. Remember this: thinking is a tool, not a refuge. Use it to inform action, not replace it. Elite thinkers respect thought, but they do not hide inside it. Decisiveness is not about arrogance. It is about responsibility, the willingness to choose, act, and live with the results. When you develop this skill, life stops feeling overwhelming and starts feeling navigable. Elite thinkers don't wait for certainty. They build it through action. And that is why, while others remain stuck in thought, they continue moving forward. Chapter 5. Power comes from self-discipline, not motivation. One of the most misleading ideas in modern self-improvement culture is the belief that motivation is the engine of progress. We are constantly told to find your why, to wait for inspiration, to act when you feel ready. Elite thinkers learn early that this advice sounds good, but fails under pressure. Motivation is emotional. It fluctuates. Discipline is structural. It remains when emotions disappear. Power does not come from feeling like doing what matters. It comes from doing what matters regardless of how you feel. I used to rely heavily on motivation. When I felt inspired, I worked intensely. When I didn't, I postponed. I told myself I was being patient, that the right moment would return. Over time, I noticed a painful pattern. The days I waited for motivation were the days nothing moved forward. The days I acted anyway were the days momentum appeared. Motivation was not the cause of progress. It was the result. This realization forced a shift in how I viewed responsibility. If motivation wasn't reliable, then progress depended on something deeper. That something was discipline. A family member of mine embodied this lesson in a quiet, almost invisible way. He was not particularly enthusiastic about his work. He didn't talk about passion or dreams. What he had was a routine. He woke up at the same time. He worked on the same priorities. He rested on schedule. Year after year, his life improved steadily. While others burned out chasing motivation, he advanced through consistency. Elite thinkers understand that discipline is not about punishment or self-denial, and it is about removing chaos. When your actions are structured, your mind becomes calmer. When your schedule is intentional, your emotions lose control over your direction. Many books that rewire the mind emphasize this principle in different ways. Discipline reduces decision fatigue. It removes the daily internal debate about whether to act. When action is automatic, resistance weakens. You stop negotiating with yourself and start building. I experienced this shift when I stopped improvising my days. Instead of waking up and reacting, I created simple structures. Fixed times for focused work, fixed times for rest, fixed limits on distractions. At first, this felt restrictive. I missed the illusion of freedom. But what replaced it was clarity. I no longer spent mental energy deciding what to do next. That energy went into execution, and elite thinkers designed their lives to support discipline rather than relying on willpower. Willpower is limited. Discipline is engineered. They adjust environments, routines, and expectations, so the desired behavior becomes the default. This is not weakness, it is intelligence applied inward. A close friend applied this idea while trying to rebuild his health. He stopped waiting to feel motivated to exercise. Instead, he treated movement like brushing his teeth. Non-negotiable. Scheduled. Emotionally neutral. Over time, effort decreased. The habit carried him when motivations vanished. This is one of the most important distinctions elite thinkers make. Motivation is emotional energy. Discipline is behavioral identity. When you say, "This is just what I do," action becomes simpler. You stop asking permission from your mood. So discipline also protects emotional stability. When actions are consistent, moods lose power. You don't spiral as easily. You don't feel lost when inspiration fades. You have something solid to lean on. Another misunderstanding is that discipline makes life rigid or joyless. In reality, discipline creates freedom. When essential actions are handled automatically, the rest of your life opens up. Elite thinkers don't live rigid lives. They live intentional ones. They also understand the difference between discipline and obsession. Discipline includes rest. Recovery is planned, not accidental. Elite thinkers don't grind endlessly. They pace themselves. Sustainability is power. One of the most powerful practices I adopted was defining non-negotiables. These were actions I committed to regardless of mood. Writing, learning, physical movement. Once these became fixed, everything else adjusted around them. Progress stopped depending on how inspired I felt. At first, discipline feels heavy because it removes choice, but over time, it removes doubt. Doubt is heavier than effort. When doubt disappears, movement becomes easier. Elite thinkers are also forgiving without being lenient. They don't dramatize missed days. They return immediately. Missing once is human. Missing twice becomes a pattern. Discipline is not perfection. It is consistency with recovery. Another critical insight is that discipline compounds quietly. Small, disciplined actions repeated daily create outcomes that seem extraordinary in hindsight. This is why elite thinkers are patient with results but strict with behavior. They trust the process because they understand accumulation. Discipline also reshapes identity. Each time you act despite resistance, you reinforce self-trust. You become someone who follows through. That identity creates confidence far stronger than motivation ever could. If you want to apply this chapter, stop asking how to feel motivated. Start asking how to make action unavoidable. Simplify routines. Reduce friction. Remove decisions. Build systems that carry you forward when emotions fail. Power is not found in bursts of inspiration. It is found in quiet consistency, in showing up when it's boring, or in continuing when nothing feels dramatic. That is where real strength is built. Elite thinkers do not wait for motivation to arrive. They move first, and when they do, motivation often follows. Chapter 6. Elite Choose. Silence over validation. One of the quietest yet most powerful traits of elite thinkers is their relationship with validation. They do not chase it. They do not depend on it. And most importantly, they do not organize their lives around being seen, praised, or understood. While most people seek external confirmation to feel secure, elite thinkers learn to stand comfortably without applause. This does not mean they are indifferent or disconnected. It means their sense of worth does not rise and fall with other people's opinions. I didn't understand this at first. Like many people, I believed visibility was progress. If others noticed my effort, I felt reassured. If they didn't, I questioned myself. I explained my plans too early. I shared ideas before they were ready. And I wanted reassurance that I was on the right path. What I didn't realize was that every search for validation weakened my internal clarity. Elite thinkers move differently. They do not announce every intention. They do not need agreement before action. They work quietly, letting results speak later. I saw this clearly in someone I once worked with. He was highly capable, yet rarely spoke about his ambitions. While others talked about what they were building, he focused on building it. When challenges came, he handled them privately. When success arrived, it seemed sudden to outsiders, though it was years in the making. His silence wasn't secrecy, it was focus. Validation is tempting because it feels supportive, but it comes at a cost. When you seek validation, you hand over control of your emotional state. Approval becomes fuel. Disapproval becomes a threat. Over time, this creates hesitation. You begin filtering decisions through how they might be received instead of whether they are right. Elite thinkers understand this trade-off early. They know that clarity requires independence. If your mind is crowded with imagined opinions, it cannot stay focused on truth. Many books that rewire the mind address this idea indirectly through discussions of ego, detachment, and self-mastery. The message is consistent. The need to be seen interferes with the ability to see clearly. A close friend experienced this transformation after a period of burnout. He was constantly sharing updates, seeking encouragement, and explaining his choices. When progress slowed, doubt crept in. Eventually, he decided to stop talking about his goals entirely, but he kept his plans private and focused on execution. Months later, his confidence had grown dramatically, not because others praised him, but because he trusted himself again. Silence protects energy. Every explanation costs mental bandwidth. Every justification invites opinion. Elite thinkers conserve this energy. They choose when communication is necessary and when it is noise. Another key difference is how elite thinkers handle criticism. They listen carefully, but selectively. Not every opinion deserves attention. Not every comment requires a response. Silence allows space to evaluate feedback objectively without emotional reaction. Most people react to criticism immediately, either by defending themselves or withdrawing. Elite thinkers pause. They ask, is there truth here? If yes, they adjust quietly. If not, they let it pass without resistance. Silence prevents escalation. It keeps power internal. I learned this lesson painfully through experience. There were times when I explained myself too much, trying to be understood by everyone. The more I explained, the more confused I felt. Eventually, I realized something important. Being misunderstood is not a problem when your actions are aligned with your values. Elite thinkers accept that not everyone will understand them. They do not try to correct every misinterpretation. They let time and results clarify what words cannot. This detachment creates calm. When you stop needing approval, decisions become simpler. You stop performing and start acting. Your behavior aligns with purpose instead of perception. Silence also sharpens discipline. When no one is watching, motivation must come from within. Elite thinkers build habits that survive in isolation. They do not rely on public accountability. Their commitment is private. One of the most powerful shifts you can make is reducing how much you share during the building phase. Speak less, do more. Let progress mature before exposure. This reduces pressure and increases focus. Another aspect of silence is emotional restraint. Elite thinkers do not express every frustration or impulse. They choose emotional economy. This does not mean repression, it means selectivity. Emotions are acknowledged internally, not broadcast externally. A family member of mine exemplified this during a difficult period. Instead of complaining or seeking sympathy, he focused inward. He processed challenges quietly and acted steadily. Over time, his resilience deepened. He didn't become colder. He became stronger. Silence also helps maintain long-term perspective. When you are not constantly reacting to feedback, you can think strategically. You see patterns instead of moments. You respond intentionally instead of reflexively. In a world designed to reward visibility, silence feels countercultural. But elite thinkers understand that attention is a currency. Spend it carelessly and you lose leverage. Guard it wisely and you gain control. This chapter is not an argument for isolation. Communication matters. Collaboration matters. But elite thinkers speak with purpose, not habit. They share when it adds value, not when it seeks comfort. To apply this chapter, start by noticing when you seek validation. Is it before decisions, after setbacks, during uncertainty? Then pause. Ask yourself whether reassurance is helping or distracting you. Often, silence is the more powerful choice. Another practice is delaying explanation. When you feel the urge to justify yourself, wait. Many situations resolve themselves without words. When explanation is still necessary later, it will be clearer and calmer. Elite thinkers build an internal reference point. They measure success by alignment, not applause. This internal compass allows them to move through criticism, praise, and uncertainty without losing direction. Over time, silence becomes confidence. Not loud confidence, quiet confidence. The kind that doesn't announce itself. The kind that doesn't seek permission. The kind that keeps moving forward regardless of who is watching. Choosing silence over validation is not about hiding. It is about strengthening the inner voice until it no longer needs reinforcement. When you reach that point, clarity deepens, discipline stabilizes, and your power becomes self-sustaining. Elite thinkers do not disappear. They emerge at the right time with results instead of explanations. Chapter 7. Elite read to transform, not to feel smart. One of the most overlooked differences between elite thinkers and everyone else is not what they read, but how they read. Most people read to feel informed, inspired, or intellectually validated. Elite thinkers read to be changed. They approach books not as sources of entertainment or identity, but as tools for internal rewiring. This distinction matters more than most people realize. You can read hundreds of books and remain the same person. Or you can read one book and fundamentally alter how you think, decide, and behave. The difference is application. For a long time, I was a collector of ideas. I read constantly. I highlighted passages. I took notes. I could explain concepts fluently. Yet when I looked at my life honestly, my patterns hadn't shifted much. And I still reacted emotionally. I still overthought decisions. I still delayed action. Knowledge had made me articulate, not transformed. The uncomfortable realization came when I admitted this to myself. I was reading to feel smart, not to become different. Reading had become a substitute for action. Elite thinkers do not make this mistake for long. They understand that information is potential energy. It means nothing until it is converted into behavior. A book that doesn't change how you act is just noise. This is why the books that truly rewire the mind for power and clarity are often simple, repetitive, even boring on the surface. They don't impress you with complexity. They challenge you with responsibility. They force you to confront your habits, reactions, and excuses. Elite thinkers don't rush past repetition. They respect it. Repetition is how ideas sink beneath awareness and become instinct. The average reader gets bored and moves on. The elite reader asks, "Why does this keep coming up?" and then looks inward. I watched a close friend undergo this shift in a striking way. He used to jump from book to book, always searching for the next insight. His bookshelf was full, but his progress felt scattered. One day, frustrated, he decided to stop reading new books entirely for a month. He chose one principle from one book: act without waiting for motivation. For 30 days, he practiced it daily. The result shocked him. His confidence increased, his anxiety dropped, his sense of self-trust returned. Nothing magical had happened. He had simply stopped consuming and started implementing. That is how elite thinkers read, and they extract one principle at a time and live it. They test ideas against reality instead of collecting them for intellectual comfort. Another key difference is how elite thinkers take notes. Most people record everything they find interesting. Elite thinkers record what makes them uncomfortable. They highlight what contradicts their instincts. They write down ideas that demand behavioral change, not just agreement. I adopted a rule that reshaped my relationship with books. For every chapter I read, I had to answer one question in writing. What am I going to do differently because of this? If I couldn't answer it clearly, I reread the chapter. This slowed my reading dramatically, but my growth accelerated. Elite thinkers are not impressed by speed. They value depth. They would rather fully integrate one idea than skim 10. This is also why elite thinkers often reread the same books repeatedly. While most people chase novelty, elite thinkers chase mastery. A book read once informs you. A book read multiple times reshapes you. As you change, the same ideas reveal new layers. Some of the most disciplined, mentally strong people I've known could name only a handful of books that shaped their lives. Not because they lacked curiosity, but because they respected integration. They allowed ideas to mature through lived experience. There is also emotional courage involved in transformative reading. Truly useful books expose your blind spots. They show you where you lack discipline, clarity, or control. The ego resists this. The temptation is to move on quickly, to find a book that makes you feel capable instead of accountable. Elite thinkers resist that temptation, and they sit with discomfort. They treat internal resistance as a signal, not a warning. If an idea irritates them, they pay closer attention. Irritation often points to growth. I remember reading a section on emotional restraint that unsettled me deeply. It challenged my belief that expressing everything was honesty. My instinct was to dismiss it. Instead, I tested it. I practiced silence. The improvement in my relationships was immediate. That experience taught me that discomfort is often the doorway to transformation. Elite thinkers also protect the context in which they read. They don't read while distracted. They don't skim endlessly. They create mental space. Reading becomes a deliberate act, not filler for boredom. Another critical distinction is between reading for insight and reading for identity. Reading for identity is about sounding knowledgeable. It fuels conversations, not change. Reading for insight is private. It reshapes how you behave when no one is watching. Elite thinkers are uninterested in appearing smart. They care about effectiveness, about calm under pressure, about consistent decision-making. Books are valuable only insofar as they improve those qualities. They also know when to stop reading. When an idea is being actively applied, additional input becomes unnecessary. Elite thinkers act until results appear before seeking new information. This prevents mental overload and shallow understanding. A family member applied this principle after a major setback. Instead of reading everything recommended to him, he chose a few core ideas and committed to living them daily. He simplified his inputs. He focused on execution. Over time, his clarity returned, his confidence stabilized, his life began moving forward again. This is what elite reading looks like. It is slow, intentional, demanding. It refuses to let you hide behind knowledge. If you want to apply this chapter, start small. Choose one idea from what you read. Apply it for 7 days. Not theoretically, behaviorally. Observe what changes. Adjust, repeat. This builds internal trust faster than any amount of information. Elite thinkers measure reading not by how much they consume, but by how deeply they change. One applied idea outweighs 100 forgotten insights. Books do not transform you by themselves. You transform yourself by acting on what you read. Elite thinkers understand this. That is why books shape their minds instead of merely filling them. Chapter 8. You become elite by repeating these patterns. By now, one truth should be clear. Elite thinking is not a single breakthrough or a dramatic transformation. It is a pattern of choices, reactions, and habits repeated consistently over time. People often look at elite performers and assume something extraordinary happened to them. In reality, what happened was repetition. Quiet, disciplined repetition. Most people change temporarily. Elite thinkers change structurally. They don't rely on moments of inspiration to reshape their lives. They rely on systems that quietly shape behavior every day. This is why elite thinking feels invisible while it's forming and obvious only in hindsight. I didn't understand this until I looked back at the people I admired most. None of them changed overnight, and their progress was almost boring to watch in real time. But years later, the gap between them and everyone else was undeniable. The difference was not talent. It was consistency in how they thought and acted under pressure. Elite thinkers repeat a small set of principles relentlessly. Emotional control, clarity, long-term thinking, decisiveness, discipline, silence, application. These ideas are not impressive on their own. Their power comes from repetition. Most people encounter good ideas but treat them as events. They get excited, apply them briefly, then move on. Elite thinkers treat ideas as standards. Once adopted, they become non-negotiable. I saw this clearly in a former colleague. Early in his career, he wasn't exceptional. He simply committed to a few mental rules. He never reacted emotionally in meetings. He prepared in advance, and he focused on one priority at a time. Year after year, these habits compounded. Eventually, people described him as naturally composed and strategic. What they were seeing was the result of repeated patterns, not personality. Identity is built through repetition. You do not become disciplined by wanting discipline. You become disciplined by acting with discipline repeatedly until it feels normal. Elite thinkers understand this deeply. They don't wait to feel elite. They act in alignment with elite standards until identity follows. One of the most powerful shifts you can make is changing how you define who you are. Instead of saying, "I'm trying to be disciplined," elite thinkers say, "I am disciplined." This is not arrogance. It is commitment. Identity guides behavior more strongly than goals ever will. And another important distinction is how elite thinkers handle failure. They do not dramatize it. They do not abandon systems because of setbacks. They adjust quietly and continue. Failure becomes feedback, not a verdict. I had to learn this lesson personally. There were periods when I applied these principles well, then slipped. My instinct was to criticize myself and abandon structure. That only delayed progress. What worked was returning without emotion. No guilt, no story, just repetition. Elite thinkers remove emotion from maintenance. They do not negotiate daily whether to live by their standards. The standards are fixed. Execution is flexible, but commitment is not. Patterns also protect clarity during chaos. When life becomes unpredictable, habits provide stability. Elite thinkers rely on systems during uncertainty instead of improvising emotionally. A family member of mine demonstrated this during a difficult transition. While others panicked, he returned to basics: routine, focus, discipline. These patterns anchored him. Over time, clarity returned. Direction emerged. Another reason repetition is so powerful is that it removes reliance on memory. You don't need to remember to be calm if calm is habitual. You don't need to remind yourself to focus if focus is routine. Patterns reduce cognitive load. Elite thinkers also understand that not every day will feel aligned. They do not expect constant confidence. They expect consistency. Mood becomes irrelevant. Action remains stable. This is why elite thinking is accessible to anyone willing to practice it. It does not require genius, and it requires commitment. The barrier is not intelligence, it is patience. To apply this chapter, choose a small set of principles from this audiobook. Not all of them, 2 or 3. Make them rules. Live by them daily. Let repetition do its work. Over time, your reactions will change. Your decisions will sharpen. Your confidence will stabilize. Others will notice before you do. Elite thinking is not loud. It does not announce itself. It reveals itself through calm, clarity, and consistency. You don't become elite by learning more. You become elite by repeating the right patterns until they define you. This is the final shift, from knowing to being, from insight to identity, and once